Chapter C.1 Prologue. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. The Capsule, a completely revolutionary gaming console created by the lead virtual reality research and development institution in the world, Prime Industries. Together with the launch of said capsule came the very first application to run on it. World of Magic. World of Magic is a multi-massive online role-playing game with its setting in a sword and magic world. Its biggest selling point sits with the sheer possibilities that the player gets. Aside from being able to fully customize their appearance, race and gender, they can do whatever they want. Save countries from ancient dangers to become their hero or destroy them to become their downfall. Or while those heroes and demons are fighting against each other, sit back and have fun creating the strongest weapons, most beautiful sculptures or prettiest clothes. Whatever your heart may desire can be accomplished in this virtual world. The world into which players are thrown into continually changes and grows with its people, the NPCs, no-player characters. These simulated humans can be barely differentiated from a normal person, and some players even fall in love with these NPCs and build up families with them. These beings can be born, live, and die. They can learn and forget. This leads to no player possibly ever having the exact same play experience, even if they do the exact same things. One especially promising and talented players of the game sits down in his capsule for the first time. In the past, he always was in the top 10 of the strongest players in many different popular games. Now, after taking a break after the last big game lost popularity with the launch of World of Magic, he decided that it's about time he gets to play this game as well and rise to the top like he always does. While in real life he is already well beyond his prime, in games his prime is whenever he is playing. He changes his character model to the perfect version of himself. 30 to 40 years younger, long luscious blonde hair, a nice and handsome angled face as well as the muscled and lean body of his dreams. So that he would have an easier time starting out by buying the best items he can, he also changed a large amount of money into in-game currency. Now that everything was prepared, he began his journey through this new world as Tech, a great warrior. The very first thing he did was actually get his job changed to warrior through a job trainer, and next he walked through the small town of Kultra, one of the starting towns of the Western Empire. He sees a number of people fooling around with each other in the streets, whether it be friends just having fun with each other or couples walking around together on dates. Since both of these things are something Tech never experienced before at any point in his life, the newborn warrior clicks his tongue and scoffs at those people wasting their time. They should be out there grinding right now. What an utter waste of space. No wonder I'll overtake all of them soon. He thinks to himself while walking down the main boulevard to look for a shop that sells weapons and armors. The first one he sees is the shop Heaven's Protection, an obviously high-class shop that seems to sell just as high-class protective items. Tech buys a golden full-plate armor and a shield together with it. Disappointed that this shop didn't sell a weapon on par with the quality of his armor, he steps out of the shop and continues walking down the street. While he was looking for a good place to buy a sword, he noticed something strange. All the weapons held by the people around him had a single thing in common. A small engraving in the shape of a hammer. Without hesitation he walks up to the next person he sees carrying one of these, and asks them where they bought their sword. And after Tech is redirected to the shop by the young, green-haired boy, he walks into an alley leading away from the main boulevard. In an area that nobody would want to be in at night, Tech finds the storefront of a shop with a sign on which he can find the characteristic carving of a hammer. Confidently he walks through the entrance. Around him he finds a huge selection of different weapons and even armor, all of which seem to be highly inferior to the armor Tech is already wearing. Hello. How can we help you today, dear customer? On the other side of the shop a small girl with long pink hair bound into twintails pushes herself up on the counter to look at the new person that just walked in. Next to her stands a boy of a similar age with short blue hair and a defiant look on his face. I need a weapon. Tech simply answers. It still feels weird to him that you actually need to talk to NPCs, who are nothing but simple code. No shit. You already got an armor and shield, what else would you need but a weapon? The blue-haired kid scoffs and turns away to sit down on a chair and begins to read. That already makes Tech grind his teeth to the limit. What does this little shit think he is? He's nothing but a simulation. Something created for players like him to toy around with and to be used for their advantage. Just get me your strongest sword. In a low voice, Tech demands. With a quick nod and bright smile, the pink-haired girl jumps in front of the counter and toward one of the displays, picking out a boring-looking longsword. Compared to other weapons he's seen on the street, this doesn't seem very strong to Tech. Angry, he rips the sword out of the girl's hands and throws it to the side. I said I want the strongest sword. Give me that one. Trying not to break the most important rule given to every player of the game, not letting the NPCs know they are inside a game, Tech clenches his fist tightly. He points above the counter to a huge black greatsword with a sharp edge and a slight white glow. Scoffing once more, the boy shakes his head. No can do, bud. That sword isn't for sale. Fuck off, kid. I said I want that sword. Give it to me now, or you'll regret it. Furrowing his eyebrows angrily, the blue-haired boy lays down the book on the counter and steps in front of it, looking up at the man in front of him. I said, that sword isn't for sale. Tech slowly raises his hand and prepares to swing at the boy. He throws it forward, and just when he thinks his palm connects to the child's cheek, Tech feels a sharp pain in his arm and he freezes up. What the? He yells out instinctively and jumps backward. Oi, the hell do you think you're doing in my shop? A deep, raspy voice asks him. Tech hadn't even noticed the person that the voice belongs to before he grabbed his hand. The warrior turns around and looks at the man standing before him. Even though he already made himself relatively tall, this man is even taller. His bulging muscles stand out at his arms and the veins popping out accentuate the scars that cover his whole body. His upper body is only covered in a leather apron, giving the impression of a cliché blacksmith. His long hair that has turned white due to his high age is bound into a man bun so it doesn't get in the way of his work, and the beard in the same color as the rest of his hair only strengthens the sheer feeling of manliness he emits. What do you want, old man? Even though Tech shouldn't be that much younger than this NPC in front of him is supposed to be, he feels an overwhelming mass of wisdom from him. The man looks down at Tech angrily, and crosses his arms in front of himself. I'm the one that asks questions. The hell do you think you're doing here? The blacksmith asks once more, his tone showing that he won't ask again. Tech clicks his tongue at the nerves of this NPC and similarly crosses his arms. I want that sword above the counter. Now. He says confidently, looking up at the man in front of him. The blacksmith instantly begins to laugh out loudly. You want to have that sword? Kid, that's my sword. You're 100 years too early to try and swing it. TSK. And what if I can? Kid, let me tell you what. If you can swing it, I'll give you every single weapon in this shop. If you can't, you buy a weapon and leave, got it? The old man holds his hand forward and waits for Tech to agree to the bet, and after the warrior agrees the man reaches upward for the sword and picks it up with a single arm. Here you go, kid. He smirks and shows his pearly white teeth. Tech extends his hand and grabs the hilt of the sword confidently. Immediately, the weight strains his arms and Tech has to concentrate strongly so that they won't give in. Alright, you got it. I'll let go now. Tech mutters out after he hears the old man say this, and before he can react his knuckles are pressed against the floor. What the? How is this sword this heavy? The old man continues to laugh loudly and pats Tech on the back, causing a sharp pain to spread across his body. What do you expect? You're barely level 1, and that sword needs a strength stat far above what even a level 100 could have. Now, how about you take the sword that my girl over there showed you, or just leave? Forever. Tech experiences a threat that he can feel deep inside his bones, so he pulls his hand away from under the great sword and grabs the other sword that he rejected before, and after reading the price tag throws a bag containing 100 gold coins on the ground in front of the blacksmith. Not giving him any chance to react, Tech storms out of the shop and immediately toward the town's gate. I'll show him. After I level up, I'm going to grab that sword and kill that old fucking asshole. Angrily, Tech exits through the gate and makes his way toward the dungeon that's in the immediate vicinity of the town. Hey, have you heard? There's a rumor that one of the originals is in town. He hears one of the players also heading to the direction of the dungeon tell his friend. Shocked, the friend stops moving and looks at the first player. Are you kidding me? Do you know which one? I heard it's Eisen. Someone his necklace. But they can be faked so easily. His sigil is known best, because he uses it on all his weapons. I guess. They're sold en masse in the capital, right? Maybe it was just another faker. Maybe. Let's just check it out later. Yeah. Tech clicks his tongue at the annoying conversation of those two and looks at the line leading to the dungeon in front of him. Cutting through said line of people waiting to get inside, Tech throws a bag filled with a few gold coins to the guards that are supposed to control who enters the dungeon when so that they just let him in. Ignoring the cries from the people yelling at him for cutting in line, he moves forward through the halls in front of him. Quietly grumbling to himself, Tech continues on forward. After a few minutes, he finally sees the first monster. In preparation for the upcoming fight, he holds his shield up and points the sword toward the monster's snout. It looks like a huge hound with razor-sharp teeth and claws longer than daggers. Come at me, you fucking bitch. Tech yells out and hits his shield with the sword to taunt the beast. Seeing that it worked, he prepares for an incoming attack. Nearly instantly, the beast jumps forward and slashes at the warrior in front of it, throwing him to the other side of the room instantly. What the fuck? Isn't this supposed to be a beginner dungeon? He yells out and then looks at the beast once more. While thinking deeply about using one of the basic skills any player unlocks, he tries to move away from the monster, but freezes instantly when he sees its level. Beast of the Living Dungeon level 100, shit. I'm going to die. I'll lose all my money and the equipment I paid for. Please, no, I need to leave here alive. Scared beyond bounds, Tech begins to crawl away from the monster slowly after losing most of his health to it. Shaking uncontrollably as he feels the beast's hot breath in his neck, he freezes up completely, preparing to be torn apart. But then nothing happens. The beast seems to be gone as well, judging from the moist air not touching his body anymore. Slowly he turns around and stares at the scene before him. The beast that nearly killed him is cleanly cut in half, covering the whole ground in blood. What kind of thing could do this? Tech thinks to himself. Kid, seems like you got pretty unlucky, eh? Nobody tell you that the Living Dungeon is in town. A familiar, deep and raspy voice calls out to the warrior. What are you doing here? Tech yells out at the man standing before him. The old man from the weapons store is standing in front of him with thick red blood running down the great sword on his shoulder, and the two kids standing next to him. Only now does he notice something he hadn't when he was in the shop before. A black and red colored coin hanging around the man's neck in the form of a necklace with the sigil of a hammer on it. Eisen. Why'd you help him? He tried to hurt my bro. The pink-haired girl asks the man confused. No. I didn't help him. I just don't want the sword to go to waste. Swords are hard to make. I hope to see what would happen if we give it to someone with a rotten soul like his, but there's no use if he just dies and loses it instantly. The man laughs so loud and heartily that he holds his hand against his stomach before walking over to Tech and taking the sword out of his hands. I thought you seemed promising since you walked into my shop. After all, who goes out wearing an ornamental armor from the decorator to fight? He seemed to be confident in his strength, but I guess there was nothing behind it, ahaha. Wait, please, help me. I invested nearly all my money into this. Tech yells out, hoping for the man in front of him to help him out, but he just stops laughing and turns around, showing a wicked smile at him. While the smell of blood called for more monsters to come to this place, they instinctively avoid the strong man that killed their brother and begin to painfully rip apart Tech lying on the ground. With this, ignoring the screams of the man being killed behind him, Aizen turns away and walks off, telling him one last thing before Tech is forced to log out. Fuck off, kid. Chapter 1 Interview with a Legend. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Hello, Mr. Joyce. My name is Samuel Morgan. We were talking on the phone last week. After entering into the hot smithy, a young man with short, dark blonde hair and glowing blue eyes walked up to a man standing in front of an anvil while he was still hammering down onto the hot metal in front of him. The man, Benjamin Joyce, turned around in surprise and laid the metal down with his tongs and began to smile. So you're the kid I'm supposed to meet today. Sorry, I'm working on a little project of mine. Apologizing with a bright smile, he wiped the sweat off his forehead and arms using the towel he always has laying somewhere around himself if he should need it, and then took off his ear protectors. The young man called Samuel loosened his tie and took off his suit jacket to cool himself off in the searing hot smithy. In any other setting, people might have found this to be rude or unprofessional, but the Benjamin knows how hot it can get inside here. So, without commenting on his action, he extended his hand to shake his guests. Don't worry about it, Mr. Joyce. Your skill in different crafts such as blacksmithing is the reason I'm here after all. Laughing slightly, Samuel opened his suitcase on a nearby table and took out something that looked like a contract to Benjamin, laying it out together with a pen. Before we start with the interview, it is necessary for both parties to sign a non-disclosure agreement. For once it is so that you will not spread the information that you get from us. It also protects the secrets of your craft that you may tell me today, so that no member of Prime Industries may tell someone outside the company. Either way, the information will be handled on a need-to-know basis, so the spread will be minimized. Do you have any questions? Since this wasn't the first time in his life that he had to sign something, Benjamin shook his head and grabbed the contract, reading through it meticulously. After a few minutes, he gave a slight nod and took the pen, then looked over at the young businessman. Where do I need to sign? In response to his question, Samuel began smiling softly. Benjamin figured that he was simply happy for making it so uncomplicated. After he pointed at the different spots where his signature was needed, Benjamin signed the contract without any complications. Afterward, Samuel did the same, thus completing the non-disclosure agreement. Alright, Mr. Joyce. Should we start the interview now? Samuel asked and took out a tablet as well as an electronic pen to use for writing from his suitcase. Benjamin nodded while keeping up his soft smile and pointed at a door leading out into the backyard of his house where his smithy was set up. Let's talk outside. The weather is beautiful today. He suggested while opening the door and walking over to a table, then sat down on one of the wooden chairs, motioning Samuel to take a seat on the other. Samuel looked through the first few questions he noted down and began to speak. The first section will be. Sorry. Young man, do you want something to drink? Some water, lemonade. A cold beer. Noticing that Benjamin forgot a basic part of a host's etiquette, he stood up and walked up to the glass sliding door leading to the kitchen. Sighing loudly but knowing this old guy will leave either way no matter what he says, he nodded and asked to get some water. Benjamin himself grabbed a bottle of beer and opened it up before walking back outside. Alright, now. What I was saying, the first section of the interview will be made up of personal questions. Is that fine? Samuel asked and looked at Benjamin with a soft, professional smile. Since he seemed like quite a good lad, Benjamin decided that he didn't mind telling him and nodded. Thank you. What is your full name, Mr. Joyce? Benjamin Theodore Joyce. My first name is that of my grandfather fatherly side and my second name that of my grandfather motherly side. Something like a family tradition. My own grandchild's name is Benjamin as well. Would you like to see a picture of him? He just got out of elementary school. Here, I have a picture of him in my wallet. Excitedly Benjamin stood up wanting to grab his wallet from his jacket inside, just when he noticed that he was trailing off. Sorry. I tend to trail off like that sometimes when I'm passionate about something. He apologized and began to laugh embarrassedly. Don't worry, Mr. Joyce. I'm very close to my grandfather as well. With a soft smile, Samuel looked down at his tablet and noted something down. It seemed like he noted more than just Benjamin's name, however. How old are you right now, and at what age did you find your interest in different crafts? The aged blacksmith leaned back in his chair and took a sip of his beer while he thought, but soon enough remembered when exactly that was. Right now I'm 66 years old. We were a family of blacksmiths for generations, sadly I'm the one where that tradition stopped. I practically grew up in a smithy, knowing how to properly work with iron before I could spell. And that's not an exaggeration. I spent a whole month trying to make the perfect paper knife for my father when I was just a little boy of 5 years. Sure, I did get a lot of help from my father's apprentices, but I still like to think I did most of the work. Floating in a nostalgic feeling when thinking back on this, Benjamin smiled deeply. I see. And what about other crafts? I was told you are also very proficient in things like leatherworking, tailoring, and even meddled in some Eastern herbalistic lines of work for a while. Samuel asked his interviewee and continued writing down his notes. I dropped out of high school when I was 16 to officially become my father's apprentice, and just when I finished it my old man died. He overworked himself because of the stress from many of his other apprentices stopping to work in the profession. After he died, I decided that journeying around the world might be a good idea, since all I knew was in that small, crammed smithy. Until that point, I never even left my hometown. I first traveled through the United States to expand my general knowledge or how to be independent. I worked with some other blacksmiths and refined my techniques even further. But at some point, I began to wonder. Is blacksmithing really the right thing for me, or was that a choice made by my heritage before I was even born? Thus, I left the country and traveled across South America. Mostly on foot, or on boat when necessary, I even spent time with some recently, at the time, discovered tribes and learned how to connect with nature. I learned different Mexican and Caribbean cuisines as well while I was at it, working with natural ingredients most of the time. After a year, I went over to Europe, and in France met a talented tailor who I worked under for another whole year, and then continued traveling through Europe, picking up as many tricks on traditional crafts as I could. I even lived with a hunter for a month, who showed me how to properly work with leather of an animal you hunted yourself, and how to get the hides without damaging them too much. When I was in my mid-20s, I finally went on to Asia, where I learned about a whole new perspective on the crafts I knew about before. Completely new blacksmithing and tailoring techniques, cuisines that I had never eaten before. To my simple mind that thought it got to know all there was to know in the world, this just showed that you can always keep growing, no matter what you do. There, how you already mentioned, I also learned about herbalism, although I had gotten to know the basics from areas like the United Kingdom or Central Europe already. Benjamin explained in as much detail as he could muster without being completely useless for the rest of the day from reminiscing big parts of his whole life. That's something that many young people dream of nowadays. I myself also always wanted to travel the world like that since I was a child. Samuel pointed out with a big smile. Don't worry about it, lad. You're still young. You can do whatever you want with the rest of your life. You're not an old geezer like me, With a soft laugh, Benjamin took another sip of his beer and waited for Samuel to continue the interview. For saying that you are an old geezer, your body is still one that many people my age would love to have. Samuel smiled softly and then looked at his tablet again to read through the next question. This was basically all that the first part included. Since you explained many things in such detail, I was able to skip some of the questions. Now, for the second part. This will be you explaining the mindset you have when you are inside this smithy or committing to any other craft. What makes you want to continue it? What does the profession itself mean to you? These kinds of things. After Samuel began explaining what the second segment of the interview will be about, Benjamin thought about it for a while. What do the crafts mean to him? It's simple, really. These crafts, especially blacksmithing, the thing he grew up with, means everything to him. He never was a book-smart man. All he was ever good at was slamming his hammer against metal. Others relied on their brain, while Benjamin relied on his hands. Sure, he gathered a lot of experience in life that may make him seem smart, but deep down he knows that he's a handyman. But that doesn't mean that Benjamin only does this because it's the only thing he can. He genuinely loves it. Exactly the fact that he can only work with his hands makes the importance and his reliance on different crafts so strong. It makes him feel like he has a purpose in life as long as he has something to do with his two hands. I'm already long beyond my prime, you know. These days I may have other things to be proud of, like my grandchildren for example, but even then it still calms my mind to just be in here. It reminds me of easier days. Benjamin finished his monologue on the importance of craftsmanship in his life, even bringing some tears to Samuel's eyes. He wiped his sleeve across his face to wipe them away, smiling softly at this speech. That was truly inspirational, Mr. Joyce. Now, I think that was enough for the second phase. Lastly, I will need to record the process of you working. I brought a number of heat-resistant cameras so I can set them up in the smithy as well, effectively recording complete 3D images of you. It would be a great help having you explain different techniques by showing them to me as an example. The young man explained at last. Nodding with a smile on his face, Benjamin emptied his bottle of beer and stretched slightly. Let's go, lad. I'll go and prepare the materials, and you do your tech-whatchamacallit. Thank you, Mr. Joyce. I'll get right to it. And like that, for the rest of the day, Benjamin taught Samuel all of his tricks and techniques related to blacksmithing, tailoring, leatherworking, herbalism and other smaller details related to other professions. After sitting down in his car, sweating profusely after spending hours in this extreme heat, Samuel stares silently at his tablet, muttering out a single thing. So this is what a legendary craftsman is like, huh? Chapter 2 The Capsule. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. It's been 4 whole years since that interview when Benjamin sat in front of his chimney, adjusting his reading glasses while tapping on his phone to browse through his e-mails. Amongst requests for custom-made items that he has already long rejected, there was one mail that caught his mind. Prime Industries. Thank you for your help, huh? What was Prime Industries again? Was it that game company? Intrigued at the memory of back then, Benjamin quickly tapped on the mail to read through it. Dear Mr. Joyce, due to your immense help in the past, it was possible for us to complete a big part of our project in even more detail as we could have wished for. Thus, especially after hearing about your recent condition, we once again want to give you the offer of being one of the first players of World of Magic. This would make it possible for you to continue your craft as much as you want without further damaging your real body. If you are interested in this concept, please inform us and we will talk about the details. Of course, you will not have to pay the regular monthly fee for the game nor the initial payment for the capsule, and instead, the company will pay for it completely. We would love to hear from you, your friends at Prime Industries. I can continue making stuff, huh? Well. Maybe it isn't that bad of an idea after all. Benjamin mutters to himself. For years ago during the interview, he had no plans of ever playing the game that Prime Industries told him about. But that doesn't mean that he is or was ignorant to what this kind of technology means, he just wasn't interested in playing it himself. He actually is also very knowledgeable about modern technology. He even hesitated for a month before agreeing to do the interview, after he finally realized that this would be the best way of passing on his will. After all, neither of his two sons nor his daughter ever had an interest in his crafts. Of course, he was proud of them no matter what they chose to do in their life, but he was still sad to see that the knowledge he worked for within the many decades of his life would vanish together with him someday. Thus, after carefully being told about the concept for the game as well as the level of realism, Benjamin agreed to teach Prime Industries some of the things he learned. Of course, he didn't only give them the info they could gather during the interview but also gave them copies of the journals he kept throughout the years so that they truly gained as much knowledge as he could give them. After that, he would have been fulfilled just quietly working on random items for the rest of his life. That was until one day around 2 years ago. Seeing that the lights were off in Benjamin's house, a thief broke a window and stepped inside, only to find the old man working in the back inside his workshop working on a commission. The thief, startled at seeing a mountain of a man bearing a weapon in his direction, jumped backward into a pile of steel scrap that Benjamin got from a steelyard just the day before, knocking it over completely. As a chain reaction, the metal fell on top of some tools laying on a table near Benjamin, flinging them right into the opening to the hot coal-filled forge. Of course, as one might expect, some of the burning coals were thrown out of the opening through the impact, directly onto Benjamin's right arm, melting into his flesh. Benjamin may be resistant to hot temperatures for the most part after working as a blacksmith for so long, but burning coal coming from a forge that was heated above 1,000 degrees Celsius is nothing any human being can handle. The thief ran away after seeing the old man lying on the floor, screaming in pain. The police tried finding him, but it seems like he got away successfully. Without the emergency button that his daughter put near the door of his workshop, who knows what might have happened to Benjamin at the time. He had multiple surgeries after that, trying to save as much of his arm as possible. Luckily, it didn't have to be amputated, but there was still a lot of damage done to the muscles and bones in Benjamin's arm. The surgeon that worked on Benjamin did an amazing job, but even so, he had to give up his passion for most of his craftsmanship. So, the offer from Prime Industries to this broken old man seemed like a miracle to him. "It's all set up and ready to go, Mr. Joyce. All that's left to do is lay down inside with comfortable clothing on, and sync up with the machine. It's going to explain the rest to you. For others, the game will launch in a month, but you can play in a few hours already." A private technician from Prime Industries explains to Benjamin while they are standing in front of the capsule that was just installed. To make sure he wouldn't do anything wrong, Benjamin turned to the young man. "So that's it. I don't need to install anything on it, or let it run before getting into it." The technician shook his head with a soft smile and answers, "No, there's no need for that. The capsule will automatically detect when you get into it and set everything up. You can choose to start the game from the desktop mode, or just by tapping the icon on the screen inside. If you ever decide to buy another game for the capsule once they come out, all you need to do is add the file .drive onto the side here. No installing, so you can just hop right in." Pointing at the back side of the capsule where there visibly are slots to add something into. Benjamin crossed his arms and nodded impressed at the state of this technological piece of wonder. "Now then, I'll leave you to playing the game now. Have fun, Mr. Joyce." After leading the technician to the door, Benjamin walked back to the capsule and looked at the huge contraption. He slowly stepped inside after he changed into comfortable clothes. Benjamin knew that the game wasn't online yet, but he wanted to at least try out this desktop mode the technician briefly mentioned. He laid down onto his back and closed the hatch to the capsule. "No applications available, commencing desktop mode." After seeing this message in front of him, without any warning in the slightest, Benjamin was now standing in a nearly pure white world with a single, futuristic gray desk and chair in front of him. It took Benjamin some time to get used to the sudden change in environment, and after nearly dropping on his ass, he grabs onto the chair until his slight dizziness dissipated. "What's this now? There's nothing even here." Benjamin yells out and sat down at the desk in front of him since it was the only thing to do. Then, just when he did, a white orb appeared in thin air that Benjamin was barely able to notice in this white space if it hadn't been for its faint blue glow. In the middle of the orb, two small blue circles appeared as the orb released a male voice. "Welcome. My name is Rover, your personal assistant. Do you want to set up your account information?" It asked happily, swirling around Benjamin's head. Confused at this, since he hasn't heard about it at all, he scratched his white beard and nodded, agreeing to set up his account. For about the next 20 minutes, Rover asked him a number of different questions, such as his name, age, as well as likes and dislikes. "Alright, Benjamin. It's time to perfect your desktop. You can change the style of this whole space. You can keep it like this, of course, but that's boring, right?" Rover asked cheerfully. With a smile on his face, Benjamin thought about it for a bit, and then answered, "Can you set it up like this is a small log cabin in the middle of nowhere? Maybe in a forest, or by a lake surrounded by steep mountains." "Sure can do, Benjamin." With that being said, Rover suddenly turned from a perfect sphere into a cube, dropping down onto the desk. The moment he touched it, the desk slowly turned from a futuristic, metallic gray to a fine, but still rough, wooden table. From then on, like fire spreading, the area around Benjamin changed just into what he described. After about 2 minutes, Rover's body turned back into a sphere and he began to float again. The actual area is equivalent to about 5 square kilometers. You can go outside and have fun, or stay in here and work on things. Anything, just as a book, for example, can be exported as a file into a flash drive. Time dilation or contraction can be set up as well. The small, robotic-sounding ball floating in the air explained to Benjamin. However, just to make sure, he asked one question to see if he understood correctly. "Time dilation or contraction? Can you explain?" "Sure thing, Benjamin. As the name suggests, it means that the perception of time in here compared to outside can be changed, up to a certain point. The current maximum rate is 4.1 for contraction and 1.4 for dilation. In the contraction setting, 4 minutes will feel like a single minute to you, while in the dilation setting they will feel like 16 minutes to you. However, for health and safety reasons we only allow a single hour to be skipped via time contraction every day." "Oh. Benjamin groaned out impressed. He had never heard of this kind of thing before, and was surprised this was even possible. For now, though, he didn't change anything about how he perceived time. Instead, he simply asked some more questions. "Will anything I do here influence me in the game, or vice versa?" Rover's body turned to the left and then to the right a few times while he was seemingly trying to shake his head. "Nope. However, since you allowed a link to your security software, I will appear within any application you run and will let you know you have a visitor, or someone is trying to break into your house, etc., so don't worry about that. Also, you will be able to keep in touch with other players through your desktop mode, since friend.requests are account-based and not game-based." I see. Thanks, Rover." Benjamin smiled softly and placed his big hand onto Rover's head, trying to pat him. Just then, he realized something he should have tried out way earlier. "Wait. My arm, it feels completely normal." Excitedly, the old man jumped up and made a tight fist using his right arm. So they were right. I can use my arm normally. Yes. Not having been this excited for years, Benjamin nearly began jumping up and down like a kid. Confused at first, Rover's eyes flashed green for a second before turning back to the normal blue. "It seems like the muscles in your right arm are severely damaged. If you want and will allow it, I am going to keep check over your vitals and inform you in case something is wrong." The small orb suggested and lost his excited voice for a second. This, however, changed when Benjamin agreed to let him do it, making Rover as excited as always. "Now, Rover. Tell me when I can finally play that game." Benjamin asks and looks over at his virtual assistant, who then pulled up a small futuristic looking in C. through floating screen. Time until World of Magic can be launched. 2 hours, 13 minutes. Chapter 3 New World, New Self. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Alright then, Rover. The game should be ready around now, right? Benjamin asked while sitting at the beach of the lake in his desktop mode, throwing rocks into the water to make them skip. The moment he said Rover's name, the small orb appeared in front of the old man. Yes, that's right. It can be launched in approximately 14 seconds. Do you want to run the application the moment it is available? He asked in his cheerful, robotic voice. Benjamin nodded his head and stood up, patting the sand from his pants instinctively. Please. Seeing how real this small world seems, I can barely imagine what the game world will be like. With closed eyes, Benjamin stroked his beard and laughed softly while imagining the possibilities that are to come. The application can be launched now. Have fun playing, Benjamin. Without giving him the chance to reply, Benjamin's surroundings changed suddenly once more. The lake and forest around him faded into non-existence and he found himself in a white space like when he first entered the desktop mode. The only difference was that behind him, a single decorated wooden door stood, with nothing behind it. Only the door, nothing else. Surprised, but figuring that there's a reason that the door was there, Benjamin walked up to it and grabbed the handle. He pulled on it and the door opened up without any resistance. Within the space behind the door was a room made of marble, vines running across the pillars that encircled a small table in the center. When Benjamin stepped through the door, it closed shut behind him immediately and disappeared. Across the room, he could now see a woman standing on a balcony, a vivid blue sky unfolding behind her. Her bright blonde hair flowed in the wind like waves and her long, decorated white dress followed in part while an air of nobility surrounds her. The woman was looking into the distance, and with the sound of the door closing she turned around and looked at the old man that just entered her domain. Her eyes began to glister as she ran up to him excitedly. Are you Benjamin Joyce? She yelled out and grabbed Benjamin's hand with hers. While looking at the young woman, Benjamin's impression of her from before instantly vanished. Laughing softly at her behavior, he begins to stroke his beard with his free hand. That's me, young lady. But who might you be? He asked curiously. Could this be another player already? Sorry. I was just so excited after Papa told me so much about you. And when he told me you would be coming here as well, I was so excited I could barely wait. But now you're finally here. She yelled out and turned around with her arms stretched to her sides. Really, the maturity that could be felt from her before just absolutely turned into childishness all of a sudden. But Benjamin didn't really mind, he was just curious who this girl was. Just as he was about to ask her again, she turned back to him with a smile. My name is Ari. I'm the artificial intelligence in charge of managing this world. Shocked at this revelation, Benjamin ripped his eyes wide open. There was no way in hell that was an AI. Someone had to be playing a prank on him. So. You're an artificial intelligence. You're not one of the developers. What? No, silly. How I said, I was created to manage this world. You see, this place, the world of magic, works much like your world out there. The people here act like, well, people. I don't know myself, but Papa told me in most games, the people, NPCs as you call them, can't think for themselves. Not in this world. They think, they love, and they hate. Ari explained happily, joining her hands together behind her back, trying to figure out the funny expression that Benjamin was giving her. Wow. That's insane. I had no idea this was even possible. I can't wait to get out there. Benjamin said excitedly and looked around to find the door. In response to this, Ari covered her mouth as she began giggling softly, I'm happy you're so excited. But before that, there's some stuff we got to go through. Ari walked toward the table standing in the middle of the room and sat down at one side of it, pointing Benjamin toward the other chair. He did as told and sat down, while Ari leaned back in her chair. First, before we are allowed to continue with anything else, you have to agree to Prime Industries' terms of service. With a slight sigh at this boring part, Ari took out a contract from under the table and handed it to Benjamin together with a pen. I see, so I have to sign some things first. Agreeing with Ari that this is something quite boring, Benjamin swiftly looked through the contract and signed it at the bottom. Following his signature, to Benjamin's surprise, the contract lit on fire and disappeared from the table. Ari then breathed in deeply to seemingly prepare for a long monologue. Rule number 1. While normally illegal acts like theft or murder are allowed in World of Magic, things that will affect a player's psyche are prohibited. That includes torture or non-consensual sexual acts, such as. Rule number 2. Any attempt at trying to take over another player's account or capsule via remote connection like illegal hacking is prohibited. Rule number 3. You are not allowed to inform the NPCs in this world that they are inside a game. I may know about it, but the normal people living here do not. We want this world to run as realistic as possible, so telling people their life is a lie does not help with that. If any of these rules are to be broken, your account will be locked until further notice, and legal action may be invoked depending on the severity of the rule. Break. Ari finished her speech of the rules and tried to catch her breath. Benjamin obviously understood the first 2 rules instantly. And torture are completely despicable acts, and it made sense for it to be prohibited to illegally take over someone else's real life belongings, in this case, their account and capsule. He was still somewhat confused about the last rule, however. What do you mean? I'm not allowed to talk about any part of this world being a game. He asked while stroking his white beard. Ari simply nods and begins to explain. There are some parts that even the NPCs know about since they have access to these things as well. Status, attributes, skills, levels, etc., but they are not allowed to know they are artificial existences, or that you are playing a game. Thus, simply avoiding the words, NPC, virtual reality, or player would be the best choice, except if you are sure there are only other players listening to you. Benjamin closed his eyes and leaned back into his chair. It wouldn't be hard to avoid it if everyone seemed like a real person just like Ari, is what he thought. Now since Papa told me you aren't a big game player, do you want me to explain some important basics to you? Yes, please. I wouldn't want to miss important parts of the game after all. Alright. First off, status. Just by thinking of showing your status or character sheet, you will be able to pull it up. You can't yet though because you're not officially in the game yet. On your status, it will show your name, level, race, occupation, attributes, as well as your skills. She explained happily. Benjamin nodded while closely listening to her, trying to connect her words with something. Your name will be set later, so don't worry about that for now. Your level can be increased through either killing monsters, fulfilling quests, or certain special actions. Every level, you will get 5 points, which you can use to increase your attributes. There are 5 attributes that you can increase like that. Strength, endurance, agility, intelligence, and wisdom. However, depending on what you do, you can unlock more attributes, most of which you won't be able to increase with your points, but instead only through special actions. Then, without taking a break, Ari continued explaining all the basic parts of the game, although Benjamin wanted to know something she was about to skip over. Whoa, young lady. Can you slow down a bit? Could you explain what those attribute things do? He asked with a soft frown, although keeping his overall gentle demeanor. Ari apologizes and slows down a bit. I'll explain it for your most probable playstyle, alright. Which is something craftsman related, right? Well, the more strength you have, the stronger you are, duh. Working with certain materials requires a certain amount of strength, just to be able to shape them. If you keep your strength too low, you won't be able to put even the slightest dent into metal during blacksmithing. With a higher endurance, both your defense increases and your stamina. You can work longer and your body will experience less of a backlash when working too hard. Agility will increase your overall speed, but also your dexterity, so you can do more detailed work. Intelligence and wisdom are attributes mainly related to magic, so I'm not sure how useful they'll be to you. But well, intelligence increases the efficiency of anything mana-related you do, and wisdom will increase the amount of your mana and how much basic control you have over it. I see. Thanks. Most of these seem pretty important, but I'll have to find out if magic will have any use to me. Benjamin muttered to himself, deep in thought until Ari continued explaining. Your occupation and skills will depend on your actions. Depending on what path you go, you will unlock certain skills, and some professions will support the effects of some of them. A magician can cast stronger magic, a warrior has stronger attacks, and a craftsman can craft finer items. Simple, isn't it? Most of it is self-explanatory while you play, don't worry. At last, with an excited expression, Ari jumped up from her chair and walked next to Benjamin. While he is wondering what she's about to do, she waved her hand and a mannequin appeared in front of them. This is the base for a human character. There are many races in the world of magic, and some of them have strongly different bodily structures, all of them are humanoid though. However, I suggest that you play as a dwarf. They are the race that is best at working with their hands. The best blacksmiths, tailors, and artists. I think that fits with you. Although. Ari waved her hand once more and the mannequin shrank significantly as if someone pushed the person from before down. A big head, broad shoulders, thick but short arms and legs, and a height at least half a meter shorter than what Benjamin is in real life. They are kind of short. Benjamin sighs. The dwarf's explanation sounded perfect for him, but this really was a problem. It would take a long time to get used to a body this short, especially since the size difference was even greater due to his normally big build. But all his worries were swept away when Ari continued talking. So usually that may be a problem, but Papa allowed me to give you special rights in your character creation. With those rights, I can make your race a halfling of something that normally wouldn't exist. My suggestion is. Waving her hand once more, but this time with a big smile on her face, the mannequin grew in size significantly, standing even taller than the human before then. The general build of the dwarf stayed in the mannequin, broad shoulders and thick arms and legs, but its limbs were significantly longer than before. In short, its build already looks a lot like Benjamin's. A giant, dwarf halfling. You get all the advantages from the dwarf race without the bodily shortcomings. Usually, this halfling race isn't available to players, even though it does exist very rarely in the game world amongst NPCs. As far as I know, there is only a few dozens of them. Young lady. This is perfect for me. I'd be more than happy to be this in the game. Benjamin stands up happily and walked up to the mannequin. To Ari who was standing next to him, it looked like two Benjamins already. So, with a snap of her fingers, she turned the mannequin into a real representation of him. Now, the only thing left is your name. Do you have an idea already? Ari asks at last. And actually, yes, Benjamin had been thinking about a good username together with Rover while waiting. So with a soft grin, he looked at Ari and told her what he wants to be called. After walking Benjamin through everything, Ari also went to talk to 4 other people that seemingly helped out the game in a similar fashion to himself, although in different fields. Then, after waiting for around 15 minutes, they all came together in a big hall, somewhat similar to Ari's room in its setup with marble constructs everywhere. Alright, everyone ready? Ari yelled out cheerfully while standing in the center of the 5 people. They were all wearing the same clothes, pretty boring brown and beige clothing, and each of them had a black and red coin around their neck as a necklace, each of their patterns different, however. I'll introduce you to each other quickly, alright. First, the original of magic and a high elf, Xenia. Ari pointed to one of the two women standing in the group. She had long deep black hair and eyes, and skin as white like snow. The only thing that seemed different to a normal human were the pointy ears on the sides of her head. If he was about 50 years younger, he may have tried to flirt with her, but since she was about as old as his oldest granddaughter, he quickly refrained. Next, the original of combat and a demon, orc halfling, Brody. After pointing to Xenia, Ari pointed to a tall grown man with dark green skin that nearly faded to black. He had short black hair and two curved horns sprouting out of his forehead, as well as two big tusk-like teeth coming out of his mouth. Next, Ari turned to the second woman in the group. This is the original of artistry and a human, Evalia. She had bright blonde hair and glowing blue eyes. Her lips were dyed deep red and her bust seemed far too large for her body, possibly to overcompensate for something in real life. And that over there is the original of the living and a monkey, beast, person, Juk. This man was also relatively well built and most of his visible skin, with the exception of the palms of his hands and his face, was covered in thick orange fur. Most of his features looked like that of a monkey's and a person's mixed up, and his face was framed with his fur as well. From his back, you could see a tail extend outward. After introducing the other four people there, Ari turned to Benjamin. Lastly, the original of the mechanical arts, and a giant, dwarf halfling, Eisen. Chapter for the journey begins. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ari introduced each of the originals, following which they stepped closer to her to greet each other properly. The blonde human girl Evalia spoke up first, placing her hand on her hip and looking at the others around them. How are y'all doing? What did Prime Industries ask ya to teach em? She asked with an instantly obvious American Southern accent and a happy grin to accompany it. Since none of the others decided to speak, she sighed loudly and shook her head. Y'all mute or something? Guess I'll have to go first. I'm an artist by heart, and ye can bet that I'm better at any and all instruments any of y'all can play. I studied art history and I earned my tuition money from painting and sculpting. Prime Industries called me so I taught them what it means to be a true artist. Happily Evalia began to explain why she was there and curiously looked around to wait for the others to start. The monkey man, Juk, sighed loudly and scratched the hair that covered his face, something he seemed to not be used to. Nice to meet you, my name is Juk. I am a biologist and zoologist. I helped with the creation of monsters, animals and plant life in World of Magic. That is why I chose the Monkey. Ari told me that this tribe is more connected to nature and their animalistic parts. Juk tried his best to hide his strong Japanese accent, but even so struggled with the pronunciation of the word monkey. Nobody seemed to mind, though, and gave him the time he needed. Despite his outer appearance that seemed more brutish than intellectual, Juk acted very gentle and filled with respect. Since the group now seemed to move counter-clockwise, next it was Brody's turn. He sighed loudly and played around with his big tusks before beginning to talk. The name's Brody. I'm a martial artist, and those guys wanted to know a bit about fighting. Oh, and that god chick over there gave me this awesome race. I can't deal with magic like at all, but in return I'm the perfect killing machine. Brody grinned excitedly and began flexing the muscles in his arms. As if annoyed by the mere concept of this guy's existence, Xenia held her hand to her forehead and shook her head, muttering something to herself in a low voice. I'm Xenia. I'm a historic researcher that specialized in ancient myths and legends, and largely work with old concepts of magic. Thus, I helped Prime Industries out so that I can experience magic and possibly find a deeper insight into it for my research. Ari allowed me to become a high elf, since they have high magical affinities, but in return they have low physical affinities. At last, everyone in the group stared at Eisen, since it came to his turn to talk about himself further. With a big grin he began to explain. You're using your usernames, I see. Well, then I'm Eisen. I'm good at using my hands, so I showed that lad, Samuel, was it? Well, anyway, I showed him some tricks and let him in on some knowledge I gathered. The abilities of dwarves fit me, but it was too small, so Ari made me. After this, he leaned in a bit to Xenia and whispered into her ear so that the others can't hear, and you, young lady, maybe should try and be honest with yourself. Xenia's face immediately turned into a bright red as she turned her face away from Eisen. And what about you? Why can't you be honest with yourself? Putting on that old man facade. Huh, what facade are you talking about, young lady? Do you think I'm pretending to be an old man? Eisen crossed his arms and laughed heartily, and once she notices that someone is doubting the man that her papa talked so much about, she stepped in between the two of them and looked up at Xenia angrily. Eisen isn't a liar. He's old. Like, really old. Ari, I appreciate it, but... Starting to feel hurt a little bit by her words, Eisen tried to interrupt her, but Ari just kept going. No, Eisen. You're really, really old. And I don't want Xenia to insult the person that my papa admires so much. She looked back at Eisen with a stern face, hurting him even more. Xenia interrupted Ari and looked at Eisen, who squatted down onto the ground, playing with the cracks in the marble while sulking. You're telling me that guy is actually old? He looks more like some kid who wants to be an adult too badly. No, Eisen is 70. That's more than twice your age, you dummy. Dumb. Ari. Stop. Eisen interrupted Ari when he heard her start to insult Xenia. Go and sit down on the stairs, young lady. I'll call you when we need you. He said and pointed to the stairs near the entrance. At first she tried to fight it, but soon Ari gave in and sulked as she sat down unwillingly. The rest of the group stared at Eisen without words until Brody cut through the silence with a loud laugh. Damn, old man. I didn't expect you to be able to tame an uptight goddess, Eisen tilted his head at the demon.orc's words. Uptight. Up until now, she was anything but uptight. Like this, talking about different things related to the game and exchanging a few professional tips regarding each of their specialties, they continued talking casually for about half an hour. Then, when they decided it was finally time for them to start playing, Eisen called Ari over to them again. But before he let her do anything, Eisen had Ari apologize to Xenia about insulting her. Now, I'll bring each of you down to the planet. You will end near a town related to your race, although what town is chosen randomly amongst the low-level areas available to you. You will find a small booklet in your pocket then. It's going to give you basic info on your surroundings, and where to get to the town. So that the villagers won't be suspicious, I think the best idea to tell them you lost all your memories and just found yourself near the town. Ari explained while still sulking slightly. Lastly, there's one thing I need to tell you. Ari built in a dramatic pause into her last words to them, then looked at them with a gentle smile. Prime Industries wishes you to have the best of fun playing World of Magic. The artificial intelligence Ari waved her hand to the side with those words, and the world around Eisen slowly began to change. Every time he blinked his eyes, something was different. First, all of the others were gone. Then, plants began growing inside of the big hall. After that, the marble disappeared and turned into the sky above him or the grass under his feet. And lastly, the air was filled with the smell of a forest. His white hair began slightly swaying in the strong wind, and all around him the sounds of small critters filled the environment. I'll never get used to this kind of stuff. Eisen muttered to himself and turned around a few times, trying to figure out if he can see any sign of civilization in his sight. But sadly, he was out of luck and instead leaned against a tree that stood behind him. There was one thing he wanted to try out before doing anything else. He concentrated and did what Ari explained to him before, trying to think of a display to appear in front of him to show his status. Eisen, race. Giant, dwarf halfling, occupation. None, level. 1 HP. 100 MP. 100 STR. 10, end. 10, AGI. 10, int. 10, wis. 10, titles, none, skills, none, ohu. So that works. Good to know how I can do that, then. Those numbers aren't any use to me yet, though. He muttered out while leaning slightly forward to look at the blue screen that popped up in front of himself. After a little bit, he thought about closing that screen, and at his command it disappeared instantly. Next, he looked at his body. He was wearing the same, bland brown and beige clothing as everyone else was in the hall before. Connected to his simple leather belt was a small bag, which Eisen quickly bound off and opened up. Inside, he found a total of 17 coins, made out of 3 different materials. 10 coins made out of copper, 5 coins out of silver, and 2 coins apparently out of gold. All of them were grandly carved with different patterns. Is this money? How much is that, I wonder? I'll have to check at the town once I get there. Disregarding the money, since he doesn't need it just yet, Eisen placed it back into the small leather bag and bound it back onto his belt. After that, he rummaged through his pant pocket and pulled out a small, leather-bound book. He flipped it open and looked at a short description of the area. By going west through the forest, he would find himself entering a mountain range, where he should be able to find a small dirt path. By following that path, he should get to a tunnel, on the other side of which he will find the first town. I'm surprised. All of these things may be made of low-quality materials, but the quality of the items are extraordinarily high for what they're made of. Before following the instructions, however, Eisen trailed off shortly and flipped the book around in his hands, trying to find any major mistakes made during the book-binding process. After about a minute, he was done checking and nodded his head in approval, since the developers seemingly worked to the tiniest detail. Once he finished his inspection, a surprising window popped up in front of Eisen. Appraisal skill learned. Eisen thought about what this skill could do, and before he had to guess, another window popped up. Name. Appraisal, rank. 0, level. 1, description. The appraisal skill will let you see the details of things around you. A higher rank will allow more information to be displayed, and a higher level per rank will allow higher level objects to be appraised. Pretty simple. So do I just need to think about it again? Eisen wondered and looked at the book in front of him, concentrating so that he would notice an effect. Book, what? Surprised at this quite obvious piece of information, Eisen sighs and tries it with one of the copper coins from his leather bag. Coin, this is practically useless. I can find out more than that by just guessing. Eisen yelled out annoyed and pushed the coin back into his bag. He grumbled to himself and finally decided to follow the instructions in the book. While walking, he once more checked his status to get used to the feeling of pulling it up, and noticed something unexpected next to the name of his new skill, appraisal. Appraisal, rank. 0, level. 2, wasn't it level 1 just now? So, using it simply increases its level. Then maybe after a while I can actually find a use for it. Excited after figuring this out all by himself, Eisen walked forward to the first town, all the while appraising everything in his way. Tree, apple, rock, pebble, leaf. After walking for the next 30 minutes, Eisen got the level of his appraisal skill all the way to 87, although the amount of information displayed did not change in the slightest. But he took a break of doing this, when he finally found the tunnel that he read about in the book. Filled with a feeling of excitement he hasn't felt since traveling on foot in his younger days, Eisen slowly stepped into the dark tunnel, at the end of which he could only find a bright light. The moment he stepped through, Eisen's senses were attacked by different things. His ears were filled with the sound of people walking around the streets in front of him. His nose smelled a number of delicious foods of which he couldn't figure out its source. And lastly, his eyes saw the beautiful townscape in front of him. The town was completely surrounded by steep cliffs and the only entrances and exits were a handful of tunnels scattered across the area. The buildings, some of which seemed to be shops while others were simple houses belonging to the residents, were wooden fronts set against the cliffs while their interior apparently was dug into them. The roads led along the cliffs in a spiral shape, coming together at the bottom at a stone platform, parts of which traveled into the darkness below, while others traveled back up to join into the platform. While Eisen was staring around the town, a grumpy-looking man with stumpy arms and legs, seemingly a dwarf, walked up to him and looked him up and down, before speaking in a strong accent with a rough, deep voice. Ye seem to be new around here, Gramps. Well, welcome to the town of Melro. Chapter 5 Stolen Experience. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Why are ye just standin' there, Gramps? The same dwarf as before asked, keeping up his somewhat grumpy demeanor but mixing a light smile into it. Eisen laughed apologetically and scratched his beard. Sorry. I'm new here, and I just thought that this town is beautiful. Seems like I got caught up in my thoughts. The dwarf slightly frowned, and just then Eisen felt a shiver going down his spine. He wasn't sure what exactly happened, but he felt like something was staring right into his soul. Then all of a sudden, the dwarf ripped his eyes open in surprise and his jaw dropped. What the? Ye a level 1. At that age. And you only have a single skill, a rank 0 appraisal skill. How the hell is that possible? He yelled out in utter disbelief and stepped around Eisen, carefully inspecting every part of him. The hell are ya, Gramps? He decided to ask at last, crossing his arms while still looking at Eisen suspiciously. Eisen swallowed down the saliva in his mouth and looked down on top of the dwarf's head while thinking about what to do. It was then that he remembered Ari's suggestion. I'm nothing special, young man. Actually, not even I myself know who I am. The only things I know about myself are in my status. My name is Eisen, and I'm a level 1 giant, dwarf halfling without an occupation. So you know as much as me, He laughed nervously and looked the dwarf in the face, whose eyes quickly shot open again. Holy! Ye're a giant, dwarf halfling. I was so surprised by the rest of your status that I didn't even see that. I thought you'd be just some human. I've never seen one of your kind before. Listen, Gramps, I can see that something's not going right. I've got a suspicion, so how about ye come with me for a bit? I've got a friend who might be able to help you. The dwarf explained with a curious, but still suspicious grin and decided to walk down the spiraling streets. Agreeing to follow him, Eisen shrugged and stepped next to the dwarf, stopping him for a second to introduce himself properly again. He held out his hand for the dwarf to shake and with a big smile said, Thanks for your help, lad. As you know, my name is Eisen. The dwarf in front of him laughed slightly and shook Eisen's hand with a tight grip. The name's Belrim. Nice to meet ya, Gramps. Belrim and Eisen continued walking down the road silently until they reached the front of a shop. Through the display window Eisen could see a few different glass bottles filled with colored liquids that he wasn't able to identify. Next to those bottles were also a few books whose titles he wasn't able to read, because they were written with letters he didn't recognize. The wooden sign above the window read Everything Magic. You comin', Gramps? I don't have all day. Belrim grumbled and opened the door to the shop, stepping inside a second later, followed by Eisen who was wondering what this place was about. Belrim looked around the front of the shop, and after not seeing anyone walked to the door leading to the back. Oi, Moram, ye got a customer ye bastard. He yelled into the darkness behind the door, and the only response Eisen could hear was a rumbling coming from the back, together with the sound of glass shattering. After hearing these sounds, Belrim sighed loudly and held his hand to his forehead while grumbling out, Don't accidentally kill yourself on the way. Sorry, From the back came a young man, maybe 20 years old, wearing a robe that reached to his ankles. He had messy hair and a short beard that looks like he just hasn't shaved in a few days. His ears were slightly pointy, which Eisen somewhat recognized from Xenia. But compared to hers, his were far more rounded. He was just slightly taller than Belrim, and while Moram's arms and legs weren't as thick as his, they still were thicker than one may expect from a human of his general stature. After Moram stepped into the room and stood at the counter, Belrim turned back to Eisen and crossed his arms. "That's Moram, he's a halfling like you. Just the dwarf, elf variant. He's the town's own magic freak. He should be able to help ye out a bit." Eisen tilted his head in confusion. "Help me with what?" Belrim gave out a frustrated sigh and shook his head. "Gramps, I'm not exactly sure, but seems like your experience was stolen. I don't know how it happened, but the signs seem to be there. Tell me, when you woke up in that forest, ye didn't have any skills, did ya? Ye got your appraisal on the way to town, right?" Eisen nodded quickly, explaining that he was appraising everything he saw on the way there to level it up. After that, Belrim just nodded as if this was proof of his theory. Moram grabbed the grumpy dwarf's arm in disbelief while staring over at the huge man in his shop. "Are you sure? And you said he doesn't have any skills?" Belrim continued to nod. "I'll bet me arse that the old man's experience was stolen. I know that it's near impossible to get his levels and memories back, but maybe ye can at least reawaken some of his skills, Moram." Moram sighed out loudly while hanging his head. "I can try at least. It's not easy to tap into someone's soul, you know." Eisen stood there unsure what they were talking about. He didn't have any skills to begin with, so how could they get them back for him? But instead of not doing it, he decided to play along. "Oh. That kind of thing is possible." "Of course it is, Gramps. Why else would I have dragged ye here? But I'll have Ta leave, got work down in the mine." "Moram, I'll leave it to ya." "Thanks, Belrim. I'll try my best." Moram answered full of conviction and looked at Eisen with an excited smile. Before leaving the shop, Belrim sighed with a slight smirk. "Ye better do, ye bastard." Near to instantly after the door closed shut again, Moram walked up to Eisen and looked up at him, extending out his hand, introducing himself to Eisen. He shook the young man's hand with a smile and introduced himself as well. "Now then," Moram exclaimed happily and clapped his hands together, "let's get to it then. For the process, could you please take off your shirt, Eisen?" "Oh, yeah, sure." Without further ado, Eisen quickly stripped his top while Moram grabbed a few materials from under the counter and mixed them together. To Eisen, they seemed to be simple black ink, and a few herbs he didn't recognize, as well as a fine blue powder. After those ingredients mixed into a single liquid, Moram looked over to Eisen. "Oh, are you a human?" he asked with an embarrassed grin, realizing he hasn't asked before. Eisen shook his head and laughed slightly. "No, lad, I'm a giant, dwarf halfling. Belrim mentioned that I'm a halfling, remember?" Moram's cheeks turned a bright pink and he laughed uncomfortably. Hee. Sorry." He mumbled out and added 2 small crystals into the mix that seemed to dissolve instantly. The half-elf half-dwarf man turned back to Eisen and walked behind him. "It's going to be a bit cold, sorry, Don't worry about it, lad, I can take it." Eisen laughed loudly and crossed his arms, waiting for whatever Moram was about to do. After a few seconds, he felt the cold modified ink touch his back through a paintbrush. Although he didn't mind the cold feeling that came with it, he was still curious what Moram was doing, but decided to wait until afterward so that the kid could concentrate. Moram continued to paint some kind of formation for the next 15 minutes, then waited another 5 minutes to let it dry completely. After that, he placed both of his hands on Eisen's broad, scarred back, and Eisen felt a warm energy enter his body. It was nothing that he had ever felt before, and the warmth spread throughout his whole body as if he was a container that someone poured hot water into. Your racial skills have been locked to hide your identity as a player and pretend your experience has been stolen. Keep playing along with that theme whenever it's necessary. Now that you have them back, have fun playing the game, Eisen, REPS. I would ask for the way to the inn, a giant strength racial skill unlocked, a dwarf's hands racial skill unlocked, original of the Mechanical Arts title unlocked. Aizen slightly jumped when he saw these notifications pop up suddenly, greatly surprising Moram behind him, causing him to trip and fall. Ouch! Aizen, what happened? He asked while rubbing his butt after the drop, but after seeing that the magic circle he drew on Aizen's back slowly faded away he sighed because he realized that he succeeded. Ah, sorry, lad. It seems like I got 2 racial skills and a title. That just kind of surprised me, Aizen laughed while scratching his beard and looked back at the man behind him, who suddenly showed a slight frown. You only got your racial skills back. Well, better than nothing, I guess. Ah, and just to make sure nothing went wrong, judging from your race they should have been a giant's strength and a dwarf's hands, right? Moram closed his eyes and crossed his arms, trying to remember the correct name of the giant racial skill. Exactly, lad. Those are the 2 skills I got just now. Aizen nodded in approval and stood up, putting his shirt back on, then turned around to face Moram. The sun seems to be going down soon. Is there an inn anywhere in this town? Moram nodded surprised, not expecting this question all of a sudden. How much is a night there? Ah, and do they have a restaurant or bar? Aizen asked as a follow-up, hoping to find out if the money he has is a lot or not. It's 5 copper a night. And yeah, they have both there. A drink costs about 1 copper, and dinner should cost about 2 or 3 copper. Moram explained swiftly, after which Aizen crossed his arms and nodded as if he just decided something. Alright, Moram. Then I'll treat you to dinner tonight. And as much as you can drink. Aizen laughed out loudly. It's just common sense to treat someone to something to eat and drink when they helped you out like Moram did, after all. Are you sure? Do you have any money on you? Moram asked surprised. Aizen didn't feel insulted by this, of course, and he didn't think that Moram was assuming he didn't have any money because of the way he looked, but instead was surprised that a man who didn't have any memories was running around with enough money to spend a night at an inn and even treat him to dinner and drinks. Don't worry about it, Moram. I've got enough money on me, ha. When does your shop close? Aizen asked with a big smile, patting Moram on the back. Moram explained that he'd usually close in an hour, but would clear up the shop earlier today since it wasn't very busy anyway. Aizen shrugged, and told Moram he wouldn't mind waiting for him. Then, while Moram went to the back and began cleaning up. Taking that chance, Aizen inspected his new skills and his title. Name. A giant strength, rank. 0, level. 1, description, the innate strength of a giant. When activated, physical strength rises significantly. Effect, plus 10% strength for 10 minutes, name. A dwarf's hands, rank. 0, level. 1, description, the innate ability of a dwarf with his hands. When activated, your hands are much more nimble and dexterous. Effect, plus 20% dexterity in your hands for 30 minutes, title. Original of the Mechanical Arts, description, a unique title only belonging to Aizen, due to his immense knowledge on different crafts that influenced every craftsman everywhere in the world. Effect, higher possibilities in the area of craftsmanship. Chapter 6 Mysteries. You are listening at novelfull.audio. That food was amazing. Great choice, Moram. Aizen exclaimed after finishing his dinner and leaned back in his chair, looking over at Moram across the table. It's been a while since he's had food this good, even though he had no idea what he even ordered since he left that up to Moram. The dwarf elf magician nods in agreement and crosses his arms smugly. I know, it's amazing, isn't it? They have the best food in town. Do they? Then it's good that I'm staying here for a while, haha. Aizen laughed loudly and rubbed his stomach in delight, calling over the waitress to pay. After giving her a generous tip, Moram and Aizen stood up and decided to head for the bar. On their way, Aizen curiously turned to his younger friend. Say, lad, what actually was that meat? Was it a type of poultry? He asked, curious of the source of this delicious white meat he had never tasted before, and Moram shook his head with a laugh. No, no, Eisen, that was Enkheg meat. They don't usually have nests around mountainous areas, but since we're at the edge of the mountain range, we can get it easier than other towns in the area. I see. Well, either way, it tasted amazing, so good choice. Patting Moram on his back, Eisen sat down on one of the bar stools, quickly ordering beer for him and Moram when the bartender, who was coincidentally also the innkeeper, came around. After receiving the jugs, he took out his leather bag and paid him a copper coin, the money in the bag clinking around, the sound of which seemingly attracting a cat that was lying on the floor near the bar just a few seconds before. Oh, hello there, little cat. How are you? Noticing the yellow-furred cat that just jumped onto the bar stool next to him, eyeing the leather bag, Eisen extended a hand to pat the small animal with a big smile on his face. Reacting to this heartwarming scene, Moram chuckled slightly before taking a big sip from his beer. Shortly afterward, Eisen noticed that the cat was looking at his leather bag, and decided to confirm it by moving it around. Since the cat was following the bag with its eyes, he decided to take out one of the copper coins and placed it on top of the counter. Immediately, the cat jumped up and looked at the coin, then back at Eisen, as if suspicious about something. But a few seconds afterward it didn't seem to care since it started to play around with the coin a bit. The innkeeper noticed that the cat was sitting on the counter next to Moram and Eisen and sighed. Oi, cat, stop bothering our customers, will ya? The red-haired dwarf laughed out, and the cat lifted its head before laying back down with its face directly on the coin. Eisen turned to the innkeeper and asked, "Ah, is that your cat?" He nodded apologetically. I hope he didn't annoy ya. And not really, I guess he doesn't belong to anyone, really. Just started appearing in front of the door a few years ago for a few days at a time, but disappears about 1 or 2 months in between. The odd son of a bitch annoyed me a bit at first, but I guess he ain't so bad after all. The innkeeper smiled softly, even though the cat hisses at him for a second after he called it a son of a bitch. After that, the innkeeper went back to serve other clients, leaving Moram, Eisen and the cat alone. Taking the time to maybe improve on the skill by leveling it up, Eisen used appraisal on random things and people around him while only paying attention to it half-mindedly so he could still talk to dwarf, elf, halfling, jug, dwarf, plate, spoon, Eisen muttered out, only noticing afterward what just happened. He was using appraisal on random things, but what was it that caused question marks to appear? Guessing that Moram might know, he turned to him. Hey, lad, I've got a question for you. Do you have the appraisal skill? Confused, Moram tilted his head and nodded, yeah, of course, I do. It's only a rank 2, but most people get the appraisal skill early on in their life. Why are you suddenly asking, though? Ah. Well, I thought you might know what it means when you only get question marks after an appraisal. Moram crossed his arms and closed his eyes in thought. Usually that only happens when trying to appraise something that's way out of your range. Not distance-wise of course, but something that is way above you in existential terms. Sometimes if something has a level that's way above yours you can't appraise it, and if you try and appraise a high-ranking item you may also only get question marks as an answer. Why are you asking, though? Oh, seems like I appraised something in town that I wasn't able to appraise, although I'm not really sure what exactly it was. I mainly remember the question marks, and I just remembered it for some reason, Eisen laughs loudly, scratching his beard while telling Moram to keep drinking since tonight was on him after all. While the young man was busy ordering more drinks on Eisen's tab, he looked around to see what might be the reason for the question marks, then laid his eyes on the cat again. It couldn't have been this cat, right? But what else was there? It definitely wasn't one of the bottles of booze. Thus, he tried to appraise the cat. Eisen stared deeply at the cat, lowering his head down with his chin pressed against the counter, his face mere centimeters away from the cat's. Nah. He muttered to himself and shook his head, turning back to Moram and finishing his drink. After a long night of drinking together with his new buddy, even though they have an age difference of about 50 years, Moram drunkenly waltzed out of the inn and Eisen decided to go up to his room, also feeling quite drunk himself, which was a sensation he hadn't expected from a game, especially after the low amount of alcohol he did actually drink, at least to his standards. He stumbled through his door and locked it behind him. Eisen slipped his shoes off his feet, and took off his clothes up until the rough linen underwear, placing the guidebook from Ari and the leather bag with his money onto the nightstand. The moment he dropped onto the bed, which was very barely large enough for himself, he fell asleep. Then, another thing happened that he didn't expect. He dreamt. But it wasn't a normal dream since he felt completely conscious in it. He was in a dark cave with nothing in it but stalactites and stalagmites. Suddenly, he heard a deep and raspy voice from all around him, that sounded as if it was filled with immense wisdom, but still with a hint of curiosity. "Hello, dear Eisen. You seem truly extraordinary, young man." The voice spoke out, causing Eisen to simply laugh. "Young man? Huh, are you sure you don't need glasses?" he asked and began walking around the cave to find the source of the voice. "I do not, but I understand how you may be confused. You may be old for those of your kin, but to mine, you are nothing but a mere wormling." Somehow hearing the voice louder from one corner of the room, Eisen stepped in that direction. But before then, a small shadow jumped onto a rock, which Eisen could only see from the corner of his eye. He turned around immediately to stare at the creature in front of him. It was the cat he saw at the bar. "What is it? You're staring at me like I'm some kind of monstrosity." It muttered out in the deep voice from before, tilting its tiny head to the side. "Well, you're a talking cat that said it's many times older than me, which is definitely not normal from my perspective," Eisen answered, slightly confused at what's going on. "Never mind that. You are unusual. Your aura seems like that of this world, but at the same time otherworldly. Your smell is one that I recognize, but I do not know from where. Usually, I always remember. You are a dwarf, but yet you are one of the giants. Which clan do you descend from?" "The Cloud Clan." "Nay, you were way too benevolent to your mixed-blood friend. You have the soul of a craftsman, so maybe you are one of the Fire Clan." "I truly do not know." The cat spoke out, jumping off the rock to step around Eisen and get a closer look at him. Eisen takes a few steps away from the cat and looks at it suspiciously. "What are you, cat?" "Cat. Ah, yes, the form of this body. This form is one that is best for navigating amongst the populace, at least from my experience. This is not what I truly look like, though. I cannot show you my true body, however." "Then why did you even call me to wherever this place is?" Eisen asked and looked down at the cat-shaped thing that was looking up at him with a cold gaze. The cat tilted its head and then lowered it as if trying to think of what Eisen is talking about. "This place. We are currently inside your dreamscape, although I took the liberty of turning this into a more suitable place for conversation. And it was a truly easy thing to do. Maybe you should consider increasing your wisdom." While holding his hand to his forehead because he was slowly getting frustrated, Eisen shook his head. "I rather wanted an answer for the reason why you called me, not where this is. I called you out of curiosity, was that not clear? I wanted to see what kind of person you truly are. Many others would have become defensive, or even tried to attack me, but you stayed calm and talked to me as if meeting an old friend again. Your soul is that of a great man's, but your body still needs to change. Seek me near this town atop one of the smaller mountains at the edge of the mountain range within a month. However, if you still lack strength at that time or you do not manage to see me, you will face the consequences. New quest. A mysterious cat's request." Description: you found yourself in your dreamscape after being called there by an ancient being whose identity you do not know. He requested for you to come to see him within a month after developing your body. You don't know what will happen if you don't follow his request, but you don't want to find out either. Requirements: get all of your base attributes, STR, END, AGI, INT, WS, to at least 100, reward, failure, time limit. 1 month, heh. What do you mean? Eisen asked, but before he got an answer his consciousness faded away from his dreamscape and he woke up back in his bed. He jumped up and looked around, and seeing the light from the early morning sunshine through the window stood up to get dressed. What the hell was that? He wondered and scratched his beard. The only hint I got was one word, he said, huh. Wormling. Maybe I'll ask Moram or Belrim what a wormling is. Before then, guess I should begin with what I'm actually here for. Dismissing his dream for now since that wasn't his priority at the time, Eisen left his room and went back down to the reception. "Ye sleep well, old man?" the innkeeper asked while receiving the keys and placing them onto the key holder behind him. Eisen nodded with a smile. "I slept great. It might have been the alcohol from last night though, haha." He laughed out loud and decided to go to the restaurant at the inn for breakfast. When the waitress came to ask him what he wants to eat, he ordered a soft-boiled harpy, egg and a light soup as well as some simple toasted wheat bread. Since he felt pretty satisfied after that, Eisen paid for his food and decided to go out into town to start working on the reason he even started playing World of Magic. He would begin crafting. Chapter 7 Dwarfs Delight. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Eisen left the inn and made his way down the spiraling roads of Melrose toward the production district, where one would find the mine, smithy, tailor, and many other production-related buildings. Since he knew most about it, Eisen decided to first go to the smithy in order to learn blacksmithing. After looking around for a short while, he found the place he was looking for, Dwarf's Delight. When he first heard about the name of the smithy, he thought Moram, who he asked about the best place to learn blacksmithing the night before, misunderstood him, since that store rather sounded more like a brothel than anything else. However, when Moram explained the reason for the shop's name, Eisen understood and actually began appreciating their sense of naming. The owner of Dwarf's Delight, Denmir Dimhide, chose the name for his shop by remembering back onto the times when the dwarves first established themselves amongst the races of the world. Back then, the dwarves settled down in deep mountain ranges like the mountain range near Melrose, and due to their fundamental bodily strength, they began mining the ores that they found in said mountain ranges. Since back then the danger of monsters was even greater than nowadays, they made weapons and armor out of the metals they managed to extract from the ores. They fine-tuned their craft to the point that any weapon made by a dwarf was instantly worth many times a weapon of the same quality made by any other race. Therefore, any and every dwarf found pride in these treasures made by their people, and as such blacksmithing became the dwarf's delight. Eisen entered the shop filled to the brim with many different weapons and armors and looked for the counter among the mess. "Ah, hello there. How can I help you, sir?" a young woman yelled out the moment she laid eyes on Eisen, since before then she was sitting by the counter half asleep from lack of customers. From the looks of it, she seemed to be a human. While the majority of people in Melrose were dwarves, every once in a while Eisen did walk past some people of other races, like elves, humans, or even the occasional beast person. "Hello there, young lady. Would Denmir Dimhide be available right now?" he asked with a bright, excited smile. It's been a whole 2 years since he last worked in a smithy, and he couldn't wait to be able to do so again. The girl tilted her head at the request she hadn't expected but quickly nods her head. "Yeah, he's in the back." Why do you want to see him?" she asked with a little bit of suspicion and curiosity while she began looking Eisen up and down. Simply and swiftly, Eisen told her why he was there. There was no reason to unnecessarily stretch this out after all. "I'm here to learn blacksmithing from him," he replied with a smile. Of course. She stood up from her chair and walked through the heavy back door. Immediately after she opened it up, Eisen was able to hear the sound of hammers hitting against hot metal, a sound that nearly made his heart skip a beat. Eisen waited for a few minutes and looked at the items that were displayed all around. From what he could tell, they seemed to be pretty high quality, although lacking in some aspects. But that could just be from his perspective since he has been working in this profession for nearly all his life. Soon enough, the door from the back swung open and a sweaty dwarf wearing a leather apron stepped through. "Alright, what bastard thinks he can learn from me?" he exclaimed and looked around the shop until he laid his eyes on Eisen, who was walking around the place to appraise every item he could see, nearly bringing his skill level to 100. After noticing him ask that, Eisen stepped up to the dwarf and introduced himself while holding his hand forward. "That's me. You must be Denmir Dimhide, then." "My name is Eisen." Denmir looked Eisen up and down and returned the handshake, then sighed out loud. "Ye the old man Belrim told me about. The giant, dwarf halfling that got his experience stolen." With a big grin showing his pearly white teeth, Eisen nodded his head to affirm what Denmir just said. Confused what these two men were talking about, the girl that was sitting at the counter just before is staring at them in confusion. Ignoring her completely, the dwarven blacksmith crossed his arms in a somewhat smug manner. "And why did you come, heir of all places? I just feel like this is what I should be doing. The moment I stepped in here, my heart has been beating like crazy. I may not remember what my life was all about, but I'm sure I was pursuing the crafts." Eisen answered while scratching his beard nostalgically. In response, Denmir sighed and walked back to the door leading to the smithy, turning to Eisen and waving his hand at him to follow. "Fine, come along. If Belrim hadn't told me about ya, ye can bet I would have thrown ya outta here already. And ye don't seem too bad, old man." With a smile on his face, Eisen followed Denmir to the back and into the smithy. The dwarf led him across multiple forges at which a few different smiths were working on a number of weapons, as well as younger men, probably apprentices from the looks of it, working on finishing the items the smiths make. "Alright, old man. I'm guessing ye don't have the blacksmithing skill yet?" Denmir asked, and after a nod from Eisen sighed out loud and shook his head. "Then come over here. Let's start with something simple so ye can at least get the skill, and then we'll see what ye can do." The dwarf explained and walked over to an unoccupied forge whose coals are already being heated up by an apprentice using bellows. "Ye know what a striker does?" While Denmir was preparing for a seemingly bigger project, he turned to Eisen and asked him something actually pretty basic, so of course, he knew. A striker is someone, usually an apprentice to the smith at work, who has the task of hitting at a large piece of metal as according to the smith's instruction using a large sledgehammer. Usually, this is done because the item is too big, heavy, and unhandy for the smith to handle alone. In modern times, the task of a striker is substituted through a trip hammer, a large and heavy powered hammer that would automatically strike down onto the metal. Even though that's the case, in Eisen's younger days, his father still relied on traditional practices rather than modern and had Eisen act as a striker as soon as he was properly able to accurately give a heavy blow with a sledgehammer. But since he can't just go and say that, since Denmir might become suspicious of how this man that supposedly lost his memories knows this, he shook his head and asked Denmir to explain. "It ain't that hard, old man. We're making a pretty big greatsword. I was already working on it before you got there and already got the general shape together. I'll heat it up now and then after I get it out, I'll just hold it on the anvil. You'll be grabbing that sledgehammer over there, and I'll tap the spot where I want you to hit with my hammer, got it? All you need to do is strike that exact spot as hard as ye can until I tell you to stop." New quest. Blacksmith tutorial, description. After requesting Denmir Dimhide to teach you how to blacksmith, he told you to act as his striker during the making of a greatsword. Follow his instructions to the best of your abilities. Reward, blacksmith skill, experience, failure, Denmir will refuse to teach you any further, time limit. Until Denmir's patience runs out or the sword is finished. Immediately after Denmir finished his explanation, Eisen got a new quest that seemed simple enough to complete. Then, the dwarf placed a huge, very roughly sword-shaped piece of metal, probably about 1.5 meters long and a good 30 centimeters broad, into the forge to heat it up. Eisen immediately noticed that the strength of this man was completely inhuman, since a piece of metal this size should not be lifted by a man that's just barely taller than it. After about 3 to 4 minutes, the metal's center began glowing in a bright orange color, showing Denmir and Eisen that it's the exact right temperature to shape. Quickly, Denmir hurried over to a big anvil, probably the one with the biggest surface area in the whole smithy as far as Eisen could tell, and placed the hot metal on it, holding onto it with his tongs, even getting help from another apprentice to stabilize it. "Now come, Herr, will ya?" Denmir yelled and Eisen grabbed the sledgehammer behind him excitedly. Slowly, Denmir tapped his hammer onto the hot metal, and Eisen struck the sledgehammer down onto the exact part. He feared that with a body whose speed and strength he wasn't used to, especially after not working in a smithy for a long time, he would mess up slightly. Sure enough, he did hit slightly off mark, frustrating him greatly. But since Denmir figured that Eisen couldn't strike for him perfectly on his first try, he had him hit an area where small mistakes don't matter too much. However, while his aim was a little bit off, the metal gave in more after one hit than Eisen was used to. Could that be because this was a game? Eisen may love it, but it can get hard or boring for a novice to strike the same spot for hours on end. Eisen took a deep breath and closed his eyes, concentrating on the sledgehammer in his hands. He felt the weight of it and imagined the wood in his hand connect to the metal at the top. In his mind, the hammer took shape and became an extension of his body. That was when he felt a sudden heat on the inside of his body, the same feeling back when Moram released his racial skills. Eisen thought that if he wanted to get back in touch with his tools, he truly had to become one with it. With that thought, the heat in his body continued to spread, and just like before it felt like hot water filling out every part of him. The only difference was that it didn't stop at his fingertips, but flowed into the sledgehammer he was holding. It was then that something unexpected happened. You feel your mana flow through you. +1 WS, Tool Connection Skill Learned, Name. Tool Connection, Rank. 0, Level. 1. Description: when connected to a certain tool, it is possible to extract the most out of it, raising one's effect on the material depending on the strength of the connection. Effect: effects will depend on the tool. Inspect connected tool for further information. Eisen grinned broadly at this sudden notification since he seemingly did something right. Oi, old man, ye gone senile. When did I tell ye can stop? Denmir yelled and kept hitting the same spot with his hammer to get Eisen's attention. Sorry, Denmir. I was just in thought. Still smiling brightly at the combined happiness of finally working again together with the skill. Unlock, Eisen looked down at the soon-to-be sword and began striking again. Just this time, he hit at exactly the spot where Denmir wanted him to, as he swiftly, accurately and strongly shaped the hot iron. After about 20 minutes, the mass of iron turned into even more of a sword. Shape, albeit a very simple one. It's what one would expect when thinking of a sword. The center. Part was the thickest, and it slanted down at the sides where the edge would be. The main. Part was completely parallel, while the tip came together in a slight, thin pyramid shape. Because of the work. Efficiency, the sword was ready to be finished after only an hour, much quicker than Denmir expected. He carried the sword over to a large tub filled with water and cooled the still hot sword down cool enough to be handled by hand. Doyle, get Brumman and have him help ya with the finish-in. Ye know the drill, first grind the edge properly and then polish it. Denmir told Doyle, the apprentice that helped stabilize the great sword. After that, he turned back to Eisen and crossed his arms, frowning at the old man. Alright, and now ye're gonna tell me what you did with that sledgehammer. Eisen responded by scratching his beard and closing his eyes to think. Ah, do you mean the connection thing? After my first strike missed, I simply felt frustrated and wanted to do it right after that. So I concentrated on making the sledgehammer part of my body and got a new skill. He explained simply. Hearing Eisen says this, Denmir ripped his eyes open and stared at him in disbelief. Yuri telling me that you got the tool connection skill just from that? He asked as a hint of curiosity entered his eyes. Yeah, is it not supposed to be that easy? Eisen asked confused, and the dwarf in front of him simply sighed and shook his head. No, it isn't. I spent a whole week trying to connect with the hammer I had used every single day for a whole year. And ye can just stand there and do it in a few seconds. Denmir yelled out in a mix of anger and excitement. Seems like your soul still remembers what ye've been doing your whole life. I never expected to be able to teach blacksmithing to someone who was obviously a master in the past. With a loud laugh, Denmir showed the first smile that Eisen had seen from him until then, and the quest was finished. Quest successful. Blacksmith tutorial, description. After requesting Denmir Dimhide to teach you how to blacksmith, he told you to act as his striker during the making of a great sword. Follow his instructions to the best of your abilities. Reward, blacksmith skill, experience, failure. Denmir will refuse to teach you any further. Time limit. Until Denmir's patience runs out or the sword is finished. Bonus, significant rise in reputation with Denmir Dimhide, unlimited access to Dwarf's Delight Smithy, bonus experience, class change opportunity. You have earned 500 experience, you are now level 4, blacksmith skill learned. Chapter 8 First items. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Alright, listen, old timer. Yuri obviously a great smith, even if your skills don't say so. What do you say about working as one? It is possible to change your occupation to blacksmith. Do you accept? After the first onslaught of system messages telling Eisen about his successful quest as well as his rewards, Denmir immediately caused another one to appear in front of him before Eisen was even able to comprehend what he read a few seconds beforehand. He began scratching his beard and closed his eyes in order to think. Did he want to become a blacksmith right off the bat? Sure, it's something he would probably be doing a lot of in the future, but wouldn't choosing this as his occupation limit him significantly? After all, he wasn't just planning to smith around all day, he also wanted to learn tailoring or leatherworking, and when he heard about it through a conversation with the other originals, he also decided to learn about alchemy. And to Eisen, it felt like he wouldn't be able to fully explore those other areas in this game if he was to choose his occupation to be a blacksmith right now. Thus, his choice was clear. Sorry, Denmir. I will not become a blacksmith, at least not yet. I first want to find out if there are other things I'm supposed to do before I make such an important choice. He explained, causing Denmir to sigh out loudly as he shook his head. I get it, old man. There are many things for ye to explore. If ye ever decide you want to be a blacksmith, after all, ye know where to find me. Now, what do you want to do? The dwarf asked and looked up at the man in front of him, who twisted his head to look around the smithy. If you don't mind, I would love to try myself at working on some weapons to level the skill up. Immediately, Denmir nodded and pointed to the other side of the smithy to a smaller, unoccupied forge. Of course. Go ahead. I'll come take a look every once in a while at what Yuri makin', and you're free to ask the apprentices for help as well. The door to the warehouse will be directly next to you. The stuff ye can use is in the front, the materials in the back are for higher ranks. Right now ye can only really work with normal, base iron. If ye make something ye wanna keep, pay for the materials, other than that it's the best idea to melt it in again. That actually also gives you experience for the skill. Denmir led Eisen through the smithy to the forge he was talking about and brought him some materials to start off with as well as tools to use. Now, have fun workin', old timer. The dwarf laughed and Eisen smirked happily. After being left alone, he decided to invest the 15 points from leveling up first, splitting them amongst strength, endurance and agility. He decided to first strengthen his physical stats over his spiritual ones like intelligence or wisdom, since to him it was most important to get his body to the strength he was used to from real life so that he could work properly. Then, his status looked like this. Eisen, race. Giant, dwarf halfling, occupation. None, level. 4 HP. 180 MP. 140 STR. 15 End. 15 AGI. 15 Int. 10 Wis. 11 Titles, original of the mechanical arts, skills, a dwarf's hands, rank. 0 Level. 1 A giant's strength, rank. 0 Level. 1 Appraisal, rank. 0 Level. 99 Blacksmithing, rank. 0 Level. 1 Tool connection, rank. 0 Level. 3 Eisen happily looked through his stats and skills, nodding with a bright smile on his face as he walked over to the bellow behind the forge, slowly starting to pump air into the coals using it. Once the forge was heated up enough to work with, he went around and threw one of the smaller ingots that Denmir prepared into it. Since what he was planning to make was a simple knife, he really only needed one of them, and not even an especially big one. It was better to practice with small items at first before moving on to larger ones. And these would melt down again more easily, so he could restart quicker. Eisen waited for a few more minutes until the ingot started shining a bright orange and then grabbed a pair of tongs to pick it up. He carried it over to the nearest anvil and placed it down, always steadily holding the ingot. He grabbed the hammer lying next to him and began slowly and steadily hammering onto the iron. He could immediately notice a difference to before. His hand movements were far more steady and accurate as when he was working on the greatsword using the sledgehammer, even without using tool connection. The metal dented under Eisen's impact as he drew it out in length by reducing its thickness. Every time his hammer connected with the hot metal it got a little bit thinner. After the soon-to-be knife was in appropriate dimensions, Eisen started to thin out the side where the edge would later be to minimize the amount of ground he would need to do. Once the edge was formed, Eisen turned the knife around and formed a handle by upsetting a small part of the metal. The process of upsetting is to simply widen a piece of metal by shortening another. Thus, by hitting his hammer against edge part, Eisen was able to form a square handle. Since the basic knife shape was now done, Eisen began to lightly hammer against the flat sides of the knife to get rid of uneven parts that were caused by his lack of experience with the system. Sighing out loud, Eisen brought the knife over to the water tank standing near him and dipped the hot knife into it. Immediately he heard loud hissing as the metal was cooled down instantly. He took the knife out of the water and brought it back to lay it down on the anvil. After confirming that the metal could now be handled by hand, Eisen grabbed some files to work on finishing it. He would have liked to add more steps into it, like tempering the metal afterward, but for right now he would take the filing as a last step and melt the knife back down. Starting with a rough grit, Eisen evened up the rest of uneven spots that were still left and got onto roughly filing the proper edge onto the knife. Then, with slightly finer gritted files each time, he repeated the same progress until the flat side was completely uniform and the edge sharp enough to cut something. As the last step, for now, he polished the metal at last, finishing the blade. You created a simple knife, quality. Average, rank. 0, description, a simple iron knife created by a smith who knew how to handle his hammer, but due to the minimal grade of the blacksmithing skill and the steps that have been skipped, the quality lacks to what it should have been. Damn it. This really was not good. I really should have done better. Frustrated at the low quality of the knife, Eisen looked at his finished product and frowned as he picked it up. It's been decades since he made something with such low quality. He stomped over to an unoccupied foundry to melt down the knife and form it into a new ingot. Once he noticed that Eisen finished his first item, Denmir walked over to ask how his attempt went and looked at the small knife in the old man's hand. It's definitely better than what anyone else in this smithy made on their first try. Including me. Don't be too harsh on yourself, old timer. Denmer's words slightly helped with Eisen's mood, but he was still far from happy. He would continue making knives of similar quality to level up his blacksmithing skill, and then once Eisen notices a considerable difference to before, he would go all in. He would prove to himself and everyone else that he was still capable of making great things with his two hands. For basically the next 5 hours, without taking a single break, Eisen continued on making the same knife over and over again. There were small, marginal improvements he could notice the higher his blacksmith level rose, but the first real difference came when its level reached 100. Blacksmithing reached level 100 in rank 0, upgrading to rank 1. It is now possible to work with steel due to ranking. Up your blacksmithing skill, you gained +1 STR and +1 END at that time. He first got to know what ranks actually meant. Every time he reached level 100 with a skill, it would rank up and unlock new abilities or grow in strength. And he would even get stats related to the skill. He figured the same would be the case with items, and managed to confirm it once he made his first rank 1 knife. Even though its quality rating was only average, and the highest rank 0 quality rating he got was perfect, the actual quality of the item was many times greater than what he managed to do before. It was then that Eisen decided to finish his day of smithing with an actually high-quality knife. Since he was now able to work with steel, and didn't have to use iron anymore, which was considerably softer than steel, he went and grabbed a small steel ingot from the storage and left the last knife he had molten down as an iron ingot back in the shelves. He placed the steel ingot into the forge and waited for it to heat up. While the metal's temperature was growing higher and higher, Eisen grabbed the hammer he was working with all day and used his tool connection skill on it. Once he finished this, he grabbed the now orange glowing ingot out of the forge and placed it on the anvil. Using his hammer, he first followed the same routine he had been all day. Eisen flattened and lengthened the steel, and was immediately pleasantly surprised when this metal resisted to give in way more than the iron did, since this was much more like what he was used to. He formed the blade to a point in the front and then began upsetting the steel to form a handle. This time, however, it would be the same thickness as the rest of the knife, and not thicker, since he was going to add an actual wooden handle at the end of the finishing process. Eisen continued, and instead of making the knife thinner at the part of the edge, kept the whole piece of metal completely uniform in thickness. Now, the shape of the knife was finished, and Eisen laid the knife down to let it air cool. During the making of the other knives, he noticed that hot metal air cooled down much quicker than it usually did in real life. It would mostly stay the same heat when you're handling it, but if you lay it down it would be cool enough to handle bare-handed in about 20 to 30 minutes. Taking that time, Eisen took his first real break of the day and ate something. While Denmer commended him for being so committed to getting better, he also told Eisen that it's not a good idea to not take care of yourself, since a healthy blacksmith leads to a healthy weapon. Whatever that meant. After the blade air cooled, Eisen got to the first filing. He took the knife and roughly evened it up, even though that was not really necessary anymore, and made sure that the knife's outer appearance was as good as it could be. L.RG then, he went back to the forge and heated the blade up once more until it was glowing, and then brought it to the tub of water to cool it back down. Although, he only held the part that would become the edge into the water. The reason for this is that this would make the edge harder while leaving the back flexible, and this generally helps with the durability of a blade. He set the overall still hot blade down on his anvil and grabbed a few bricks, building a small box, that was only big enough for the knife to fit into, onto the ground. He then took a shovel and put some of the lower temperature coals into it. Eisen then placed the knife into the box, on another brick so that it wouldn't directly touch the coals, and covered the top of it so that it would continue to be at a heat of about 150 degrees Celsius for a while and not lose too much heat. This was done so that Eisen could temper the blade, making it significantly harder and more durable in the end. After about 2 hours, Eisen would be able to get the tempered blade out of the box, so that he would only need the last finishing touches. Taking that time, he went over to a different part of the workshop where some of the apprentices were working on wooden handles for the weapons they forged that day. Since he already measured the exact size he would need the handle to be to fit, Eisen grabbed a piece of wood, a material he didn't recognize, and decided to make a handle out of it. The wood was a dark color and relatively hard. From what he could tell, it would probably end up looking amazing once properly shaped. Eisen began carving the wood into proper shape so that it would sit nicely in his hand when the knife was finished, and then cut it into 2 halves so that he could place them over the bare metal later. After confirming that the 2 pieces fit nicely together, he carved out a small part of the wooden half center so that they would snugly fit. Since it only took him an hour to do this, Eisen spent the last hour talking to Denmir about different methods of forging that are best for different kinds of weapons and materials. Eisen was specifically interested in higher rank materials that he saw in the warehouse before. Once the last hour was over, Eisen removed the top of the brick box and removed the tempered blade with his tongs. He waited until the blade could be hand-held again and then went to the other part of the workshop again and got to attaching his handle. While he was talking to Denmir, he also asked about the strength of the glue, and since it seemed to be a special glue made of a mixture of different naturally adhesive plants, Denmir advised Eisen to only use a small amount since that was all that was necessary. Thus, Eisen put a little bit of the glue on each of the wooden halves and placed them around the metal handle. He bound both halves together with a few strings while the glue dried, and after a few minutes, it was ready to be finished. At last, Eisen began to sharpen the knife with multiple sharp files until the edge was sharp enough to already cut things, but Eisen still took it to the last step and finally sharpened the knife with a whetstone. When he looked at the final notification, Eisen grinned broadly at what he just made. You created a high-quality knife, quality. Perfect, rank. 2, description, an extremely high-quality steel knife created by the blacksmith Eisen. Due to his great abilities, he overcame the limitations of the blacksmithing skill and reached a higher rank than normally possible, and even then perfected it. Effect, +5 AGI, +2 STR, for creating an item of overwhelming quality, you gained +1 STR and +1 END, you overcame the limits of your skills. Limit Breaker title gained, title. Limit Breaker, description, by breaking the limits of your skills, you showed the world what you are, effect, +1 to all basic stats. Chapter 9 Worries. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Eisen stood there with the knife in his hands, reading through the number of notifications he got for its completion. Although he had suspicions about this, only now was he able to actually confirm. When it comes to production-type skills, the highest rank an item you create can have corresponds to your skills rank. This fact made Eisen even happier when he considered that his skills were greater than what the developers hoped or planned for. And due to the item's rank being higher than his skills, his blacksmith level rose by a whole 14 in one go. Of course, he was incredibly happy about the free stats he earned as well, since this worked toward the quest he got from that weird cat the night before. While he was standing there, thinking about what to make next, Denmir came over to him one last time for the day before closing the smithy. Old timer, what did you make right there? You been working your ass off for that it seems. The smiling dwarf walked over to Eisen, who quickly handed the knife to him so that he could look over it. Just then, he ripped his eyes open in surprise. Hey, old timer. You reached rank 2 in a single day. He asked, full well knowing the quality and amount of knives he made before. If Eisen didn't have some kind of skill that heightened his proficiency game, it would be impossible to reach rank 2 in blacksmithing with just that. But when Eisen shook his head with a soft smile, Denmir only ripped his eyes open further. But ye gotta be fucking kiddin' me. Yeri a limit breaker. He yelled out in complete and utter shock. This got the attention of the rest of the smiths working in there as well as the apprentices. Confused and in disbelief, they walked over to Denmir and Eisen, forming a small circle around them immediately. Listen old timer, Yeri a fucking genius. Ye were obviously a master amongst masters in your past 10 lives. Please, I beg ya, work as a smith. Ye don't even have ta work here, just work as one. It is possible to change your occupation to master blacksmith. Do you accept? Eagerly, everyone in the smithy was dead silent, waiting for Eisen's answer. This is something every single one of these men had been waiting for the moment they stepped into this room for the first time. To be able to become a master blacksmith after being acknowledged by Grandmaster Blacksmith Denmir Dimhide. That's exactly why nobody knew what to say when Eisen next opened his mouth. Sorry, Denmir, but how I explained before, it is too early for me to make such an important choice. I haven't even tried working in other professions yet. But you don't have to worry, I will probably never in my life stop blacksmithing. While frustrated to hear that Eisen will not accept becoming a blacksmith just yet, Denmir was happy that he still had such an outlook on the profession. I understand, old timer. Just so you know, if ye ever need my help in the slyest, just ask. Your reputation with Denmir Dimhide has risen significantly, and what are all of ye gawking at, there? Get out already, get out. Ye don't have any work left. At last, Denmir turned to the rest of the smiths and apprentices, shooing them away. Eisen followed the group of men exiting the shop with a smile on his face, and the knife in his hand. Right now he may not have any use for it, but he specifically made it with one thing in mind. Cooking. He would continue blacksmithing for a while until satisfied, and then continue on to other professions, amongst which cooking may be. Thus, he would now create things he would most likely need in the future. Like sewing needles, carving knives, and of course weapons. The reason why he wasn't just buying the items he needed in stores, was that he noticed one thing. The effect of tool connection was far stronger for items Eisen created himself compared to ones he had just seen for the first time. At the beginning there may be no difference between either of those options, but according to Denmir it made an immense difference in the later ranks of connectivity with the items. Amongst the bonuses it gives are higher damage, better control, and when used to create other items, apparently even a higher probability of getting a high rating for the item. And maybe even more beyond that. But since the highest connectivity rank that Denmir achieved was rank 7, and usually especially the ranks 8 to 10 would give amazing new abilities when it came to anything ranked, he wasn't able to tell Eisen everything he wanted to know. Good night, Denmir. I'll see you tomorrow then. Eisen smiled softly as he began walking up the spiraling streets of Melro. He went back to the inn he stayed at the night before and walked up to the front desk. Ah, hello again. You want to stay for another night? The dwarven innkeeper asked when he noticed Eisen walk in. Yes, that would be great. Eisen answered with a smile and dropped the fee for one night stay onto the desk. The innkeeper turned around and grabbed one of the keys, the one belonging to the same room Eisen stayed in last night, and handed it over to him. Have a nice stay. He answered. It seemed to Eisen that he was in a considerably worse mood than yesterday. Maybe it had something to do with the cat. From what Eisen could tell, it completely disappeared after his dream last night. Well, cat, or whatever that thing actually was. Eisen didn't think about it too much, since he would find out in an in-game month anyway. Before deciding that he would log off for the day soon, Eisen sat down at a table in the restaurant, and immediately a waitress walked up, a different one compared to yesterday. She was still a beautiful young girl, but in this case, young truly meant young. She looked to be only about 10 or 11 years old and had her bright pink hair tied into twin tails. At first, Eisen thought that she was an elf, because she had pointy ears, but this girl's were different to what normal elves seem to have as ears. While an elf's ears were still mostly the same size as a human's, the ears of this waitress were maybe 2 to 3 times longer than normal, as if one took an ear and stretched it out. When he imagined this happening, Eisen couldn't help but laugh slightly, although he tried his best to hide it from the young girl. What are you laughing at? I like funny things. She exclaimed with a bright smile, causing Eisen to laugh even more. The way she acted was a lot like someone else he had not seen in a while. Don't worry about it, young lady, you just reminded me of someone I know. Eisen answered, scratching his beard with a grin. In response, the girl tilted her head confused. Oh. Ah, I totally forgot. Sorry. What would you like to eat, dear customer? She asked cutely and took out a small notepad and eagerly waited for Eisen's order. Since he liked the dish he had yesterday with Moram, he decided to order the same again. Ankeg fillet with roasted potatoes and beans, as well as a light vegetable soup. Okie dokie. It's gonna be here soon. The waitress answered gleefully and nearly literally skipped away. After only about 10 minutes, she brought him the dish, and he quickly enjoyed the meal. Eisen tipped the girl liberally and made his way upstairs to his room, to fall asleep and log out. Arg, my back hurts so much. I'm really fucking old, huh? Benjamin swore out loud when trying to step out of the capsule. He was laying down for a constant 12 hours, which seemed a lot longer through time dilation, after all. He slowly stepped toward the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water, grabbing the container filled with his medication lying next to the sink. It was pretty much right about then that his phone rang. Oh, just shut up, I'm nearly there. He yelled at the phone as if it could hear him while he was slowly walking up to it. He picked it up and was immediately met with a scream. Dad! Are you okay? I was trying to reach you all day. Benjamin's daughter yelled, worry deep in her voice. Benjamin sighed loudly and began to laugh a little bit. Yes, Melody, I'm fine. I told you I was going to play the game today. Yes, but does that mean you can't answer the phone? Even Tony's kid answers texts while sitting in front of the computer. Melody explained, her worry slowly turning into frustration. Melody, you're about half my age, how can I know more about technology than you do? What's that supposed to mean? Just get off your old butt and answer the phone sometime, Dad. I literally can't hear it, since I am not conscious while playing. Just wait a while, I'm sure you'll understand when there's stuff in the news about it. What do you mean you're not conscious? Dad, is that some kind of Eastern meditation thing? Worried, Melody asked what her father was talking about, who once more just sighed. No, Melody, it's not. I tried explaining it to you so many times. When you're at the East Coast again next time, I'll show it to you, until then don't worry. I'm 70 years old, I know what I'm doing. So why did you call anyway? From across the phone, Benjamin could hear Melody click her tongue before she responded. I just wanted to check on you, can't I do that? Of course you can, honey. But I don't need you to call me to see if I'm alright every single day. I'm just worried, Dad. You know exactly that you can't handle yourself like you used to. You can't even use your arm anymore. Even though this statement annoyed him greatly considering the actual circumstances, Benjamin simply sighed and stayed as calm as he could. Melody, it's not like that, and you know it. Listen, I've got to go, I'm pretty tired. I'll call you sometime tomorrow, okay? Yes, but please actually do. And don't forget because you're playing your game. Don't worry, I won't. Good night, honey. Good night, Dad. Benjamin hung up the phone and looked at his right hand. His skin was covered in burn marks and surgical scars, and he felt a sharp pain when he formed a fist. He decided to eat something in real life, and then spend the night continuing to play, since his body was in a sleep-like state when he would enter the virtual world. Good morning, Denmir. Eisen exclaimed first thing in the morning, waiting for someone to open the shop. When he was feeling frustration after talking to Melody, the only thing he could think of was to return and continue swinging his hammer. The dwarf looked up at Eisen and released a soft smile. Ah, you seem pretty enthusiastic this morning, old timer. Eisen simply nodded and entered the smithy together with Denmir. So, you need any help, or can I leave you to do your own thing? I'm fine for now, I'll tell you if I need your help. With a bright smile, Eisen immediately went to the storage room and grabbed a large steel ingot. Today, he was going to make himself a hammer, one that would be a lot more fitted to his body type. While the hammer he was using the day before was alright to use, he still preferred a hammer that was perfectly fitted to him. While thinking about the steps before him, Eisen grabbed the hot ingot using a pair of tongs and began swinging his current hammer against his soon-to-be hammer, feeling the vibrations move through the metal and into his arm. This was a feeling he would never want to miss.